The Democratic National Convention. It came to Chicago last month and brought incredible enthusiasm for Kamala Harris. But it also brought protests every day at the convention. I was at many of those protests.
The people united will never be defeated.
Only some out of thousands of voices pleading to be heard. Inside the United Center, an electric atmosphere and enormous enthusiasm for Kamala Harris.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
But on the opposite side of the arena's massive security perimeter, several thousand demonstrators took to the streets on each day of the convention in the name of a free Palestine and protesting the Israeli attacks in Gaza.
Free Palestine!
One of those demonstrators was Hannah Ayesh,
Intifada! Intifada!
DePaul Jr. and member of SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, at DePaul.
You know, if you looked at the crowd, it was so diverse. It was not just Palestinians who were there. We had so many other organizations who are, present in the Chicagoland area who were there. And I think that solidarity and seeing it like physically there in person was amazing to see.
Demonstrations, rallies, and marches in the West Loop area came in many different shapes and sizes. Likely the largest of these protests drew about 11,000 participants and was put together by a coalition of over 270 national and local organizations. DePaul alum Jared Menegat was at that protest. He was involved with the anti-war committee during the DNC and helped fundraise for the coalition.
We're seeing so many different demographics, and it's not just the people showing up to the march, it's the movements that are showing up to the march. Beyond just like the existence of the demographics there, it showed what solidarity looks like. And I think people are recognizing that Palestine is the principal contradiction right now.
Many attendees could not help but notice the eerie similarities between the current tense political environment and that of 1968.
In the heart of downtown Chicago, there is an odor of tear gas still left in the air here.
An ongoing war unpopular with young people, an incumbent president suddenly dropping out of the race, a Democratic convention in Chicago, and a looming election only months away. But for Professor Chris Bury, the journalist in residence at DePaul, that's pretty much where the similarities end.
The better parallel, I think, is 1996 for Bill Clinton's renomination here in Chicago at the United Center, because 68, as we know, was a terribly violent convention with thousands of arrests, people getting injured and killed, police basically engaging in a riot against the protesters. So there's really no comparison to 68.
And when comparing police and city responses to the protests, Bury says this year's was overwhelmingly peaceful.
I think the DNC was a success, both for the party, which had a successful nomination of Kamala Harris, and for the city of Chicago, which under a lot of pressure and global spotlight managed to keep the city safe for the delegates and safe for visitors and safe for protesters.
But some protesters felt that police and city responses were excessive. Things like permit refusals, sound restrictions, and what some felt were overreactions by the police during several of the demonstrations.
This was a march that we worked really hard to establish was going to be family friendly. And it was family friendly. And to see how many officers with batons, with guns, with gas masks come out just to prepare for them to come back to the park, it reminded me of 2020 when I saw some officers, hitting their clubs on their hands, ready to bash people's heads in. It just reminded me that getting our voices heard like this is something that takes a lot of work.
Following the convention, Ayesh and other SJP members felt it was important to keep protesting the war in Gaza, to continue to pressure for divestment and ensure the safety of Palestinian-American students at DePaul. They feel the recent protest at the university achieved these goals and that their efforts would continue.
I don't think DePaul realized that last year, a lot of us were actually underclassmen. I think DePaul kind of expected most of us to be seniors who are graduating, and that after the encampment ended that it would have gone. But I was only a sophomore last year. I'm still going to be here next year as well, so that they're not getting rid of me that easily.
It should tear at your fiber, every fiber of your being, to ignore a genocide. It's pretty much if you have any inclination to care about your own humanity and care about the humanity of others, it's important to continue in the struggle and to learn with other people.
I think many DePaul students are passionate on this issue. They want to see a change in U.S. policy, and they've got every right to push for that on campus and outside of campus.
If anything, this is just the beginning.
Aish compares SJP's struggle with DePaul administration to her own family's generations-long struggle in the West Bank. The way she sees it, as long as her family is forced to speak up and speak out for their freedom, she will continue to do the same.
A lot of our families have been fighting this occupation for over 75 years. My great-grandfather survived the Nakba. My grandfather survived the first Intifada, and my uncle survived the second Intifada. And I have family right now who are still surviving this current genocide right now. If our families have been fighting this apartheid system for over 75 years, what makes DePaul think that we as students are gonna just stop because they told us to?
With little movement on a ceasefire deal and a monumental election just around the corner, the calls will continue for a free Palestine and an end to the war in Gaza. For Good Day DePaul, I'm Daniel Duff.